Wow, I realize we have already covered a lot of story in the past several weeks. We've gone from creation and Adam and Eve and Noah and the flood and everyone faltering and disappointing God. And then God saying, all right, I got to do this a different way. And then he calls Abraham and Sarah, and they're really old, but they have kids anyhow. And then Isaac is out there and he meets a wife and he has twins, but one of them is a schemer and kind of tosses everything up and on its head and runs away and matures and comes back. And then as he encounters God and wrestles with him, his name is changed. And in his time of maturity, God matures him by giving him at least 13 children, 12 sons and 1 daughter. And so he comes back, and then, of course, one of his youngest sons, one of his favorites, Joseph, is a little snotty-nosed kid who his brothers don't like, and they try to kill him and decide not to and throw him into a pit and then sell him into slavery. Then he goes to prison and is finally actually exalted to the right-hand guy of Pharaoh, saves not only Egypt, but the surrounding nations, including this little tribe now of Israel that comes down and lives with Joseph down in Egypt. And then 400 years happens, and now we're here. So all of this story, so many rich and wonderful details, and it makes me want to remind you, if you're not involved in coming on Sunday morning early, or if you're not involved coming to one of the Bible studies on Monday or Wednesday nights, or men's breakfast or women's Bible study, or the fun, crazy things that we do on Tuesdays at 5:30, I would encourage you to do so, because there's a lot of details I'm going to miss. I've already missed. I'm going to miss today. I will miss into the future as we try to get through in a chronological order God's story. But I would encourage you to get even more involved in this because there are some rich, wonderful details that can come out in the discussion among all of us when we're involved in one of those groups. But today we get to Moses. And part of Moses' story reminded me about all the shoes I love. I have this love-hate relationship with my shoes, especially after ankle surgery. And so, tennis shoes, yes, these are the best because they give you the most support and everything. But hey, I got a pedicure. I don't need to be wearing tennis shoes all the time. I need to show those toes off, right? So I'm going through my stuff, and then I have, these were some of my favorite shoes. But our chocolate lab Charlie chewed that one. And so those shoes make me sad now. Because I want to wear them, but I can't. And after surgery, I replaced my high heels with lower heels. That made me sad too. And then I have sandals. Oh my gosh, just like Moses, I have sandals. These are the ones that are comfortable, not so fashion forward, but they're the ones that feel the best because they're cushy and padded and your toes are free. And so these are my fancy sandals. So these are dress-up sandals, and then I have beach sandals and dress down. And I like these because they're sparkly and have lots of colors, so I can wear them with a lot of different things. I started thinking about shoes. When I was working with Moses, I thought about what it was that God had asked Moses to do when he called him out of the wilderness up to the Mount Horeb. He called him to take off the thing that protects our feet. He said, Moses, you're on holy ground. Take off your sandals. He asked him to take off the thing that was protecting him from the regular elements. In ancient times, people wore sandals to protect their foot, but sandals could also be part of your social status. They could signify whether you were wealthy or poor, what kind of social contracts you were involved in. And a pair of sandals in ancient Egypt could be purchased for a sack of grain. So not super expensive, but still something of necessity, and you would want to trade that sack of grain to get your sandals. When Moses encounters God, he's told to remove that barrier, to remove the barrier that prevented him from feeling the earth, from feeling the substance from which God created humans, the substance that God used that clay to mold the animals and creations, the substance that the trees are planted in, so that he did not have something between him and the earth, the place that we will all return to again. When Moses removes his sandals, he will find the true ground and he will know where he stands. This is what Exodus 3 says about Moses. Now Moses was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian, and he led the flocks to the far side of the desert and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. There the angel of the Lord appeared to him in flames of fire from within a bush. Moses saw that through the bush, though the bush was on fire, it did not burn up. So Moses thought, I will go over there and see this strange sight, why the bush does not burn up. When the Lord saw that he had gone over to look, God called him from within the bush, Moses, Moses. And Moses said, Here I am. Do not come any closer, God said. Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground. Then he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. At this, Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. Then the Lord said, I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I have heard them crying out because of their slave drivers, and I am concerned about their suffering. So I have come down to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians and to bring them up out of that land into a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey, a home of the Canaanites and the Hittites and the Amorites and the Perizzites and the Hivites and the Jebusites. And now the cry of the Israelites has reached me, and I have seen the way the Egyptians are opposing them. So now go. I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. But Moses said to God, Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? And God said, I will be with you. And this will be the sign that it is who I have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you will worship God on this mountain. This is the word of the Lord. So, the sanctuary of Canyon Hills Presbyterian Church has been placed on a mountain, placed on a hilltop. We are, in effect, standing on holy ground. And you are invited to take your shoes off, if you like, in this holy ground, to dig in, to feel the ground beneath you. Now, I know some of you are like, nah, I don't know about that. But we are invited to find our balance here, to feel our toes in that clay that God has used to create and shape the future. God invites you to stand barefoot without barriers so that you might know his presence in your life, that you might know God in that blazing fire in the bush that does not consume. So there's Moses, barefoot, standing in front of God, gazing at this indescribable event. Moses, who is a self-described alien, living in a foreign land, a man who has really never had a home. Moses was born to a Hebrew woman, but put in a basket, floated down a river, and adopted by Pharaoh's daughter. But he was raised by his biological mom and then given back to Pharaoh's daughter to be part of the palace. He was given an Egyptian name. Then he sees an Egyptian taskmaster over his kinfolk. He's enraged and he kills an Egyptian, thinking that this might get him to connect better with his kinfolk, and yet they turn on him. And he has to actually flee Egypt, flee from Pharaoh, flee from his own kin. And when he gets to the desert, they recognize him as an Egyptian. Moses, to this point, has no home. He barely has an identity. We learn later he has a terrible speech impediment. He is not Charlton Heston. Moses is as ordinary gets. And so he flees to Egypt to get out of the mess that he has created. He slips into the desert to wander and to wonder and to escape and to start over. He goes from being a palace punk to becoming a shepherd of all professions and working for his father-in-law. And out in the wilderness, Moses stumbles onto Mount Horeb, which is the Mount of God. And God comes down to meet him there. Mountains were traditional dwellings for the divine. Fire is an iconic symbol for the presence of God. And so there, on that mount, in that divine presence, Moses is called up. Ordinary, bumbling, stumbling Moses is called up, and God comes down. God instructs Moses to remove his sandals. And that gesture not only signifies the holiness of that place, but it is also part of the ancient traditions. When you entered a home, you removed your shoes. Moses has finally come home. He is now at home with God. And God comes down and meets Moses where he's at. He invites him to come home, to feel at home. And just like Moses, God comes and meets us where we are. Now, we might not always be where we're supposed to be, but God will find us anyhow, and will come down and will meet us where we are. God calls Moses from where he is, in isolation, and sends him where he needs to be. God does that for us. God meets us where we are, calls us home, and then sends us to where we need to be. Moses needed to go back to Egypt to lead a new flock. And God, again, using those life circumstances of Moses to fulfill his purposes, because who better to go back and meet with Pharaoh than someone with dual citizenship? Moses was part of the palace, but he's also a Hebrew. Who better to come and meet with Pharaoh than someone who knows both worlds? Who better to go talk to Pharaoh than somebody with disabilities? Because for sure, the power that comes from Moses is not of his own making. The words that come from Moses are not of his own making, but all God. So who better than someone who doubts themselves and is humbled before God to go and to be that leader? So after Moses argues with God about his qualifications, then Moses actually turns the question to God's identity. Moses says, well, when they ask me, what is his name? What shall I say to them? Moses poses this question to God, and God's kind of cryptic response is, I am who I am. Ehyeh asher ehyeh. It is a very difficult phrase to translate in Hebrew. It's a very slippery phrase, and it has been the subject of numerous translations, including, I will be what I will be. The name of God, I am who I am, I will be who I will be, indicates that God is known through his actions. And God's actions happen through us. I am who I am. I will be what I will be. Means that God is known through us. God's work is carried out through human actions, just as Moses saw the Egyptian beating the Hebrew, just as Pharaoh's daughter saw Moses in the basket and heard him crying, so also God has seen the misery of his people and heard their cries and was moved into action. Seeing, knowing, and acting for others is part of the very identity of God. Moses' identity emerges from his past. Those things in his past that shaped who he became and who he would become. God's present actions are shaped by the past that we are trying to understand, so that we might know what is coming in the future. The God of the Exodus is the one who remains faithful to the covenant with Abraham and with Isaac and with Jacob. His identity is constant, and God promises, I will be with you. I know there are so many times when I am constantly asking God for a sign. I need a sign, God. And maybe Moses was asking for that as he was wandering in the desert. And maybe there were little signs that he missed along the way. And finally, God comes down the mountain and creates a burning bush that could not be missed. There is no way you could turn aside from it. It was huge. And Moses responded to that sign. There are so many times in our lives when we ask God for a sign. Many of you know, had seen on Facebook, we had to put our dear buddy to rest this week. But for weeks prior to that, I had prayed to God for a sign. My kids thought he had already probably passed his expiration date. But I needed to know definitively before I made that decision, and I prayed every day for a sign, knowing I was probably missing some of them. But when he couldn't get up very well and he didn't eat, and any of those who have Labradors, once they don't eat, that's it. That was the sign, and I knew it. And we knew what we had to do. There are signs in our life all the time. Sometimes we miss them, but sometimes they're big enough to get our attention. Our instructions from Exodus are clear. God meets us where we are. Our life experiences have shaped us to become who we are, and that is exactly who God wants to use. Everything that makes up who you are, God comes and meets us where we are and wants to use the very person that you have become. He uses our past to create a future so that we might act on God's behalf. But we need to remove the barriers between our souls and the earth. God continued to use signs and wonders through Moses to accomplish his deliverance of the people of God. He defeated the Egyptians and Pharaoh with 10 plagues, the last of which foretold our own deliverance through the blood of the Lamb, Jesus Christ. Through the sacrifice of Jesus Christ on the cross, death passes over us, and we are delivered into new life. Take off your shoes. Meet your Creator. You are home. You are home. Amen.